Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for a new Film Fanatic video, live at Film Fanatic headquarters here in the glorious city of Northport, Maine. Hope everyone's doing good. Want to always, give a thanks and shout out to people checking out this channel. It's always a great time. I did a show a couple days ago on probably out of all of the movies that I collect and that I've bought over the years, and definitely within the last few years, I've talked about my transition and how in my buying habits and the films I buy, where it started out like most people back in the day, many, many, many years ago, with VHS. I was a kid back in that whole decade of the 80s and 90s, and in the 80s I started accumulating VHS tapes. My family, like most households, we were all accumulating VHS tapes, and then I eventually started buying quite a few on my own. And then fast forward, probably from that time period, fast forward about 10 years or so, then the DVD explosion happened. And that was, I remember it was kind of like a revolution. It was kind of like being a part of a revolution as far as being a fan of films. Suddenly, seeing movies in this, new format that was so exciting. And for me, I remember it being just this, game changer in a way of seeing all of these films that I had never seen before. And I was just completely blown away by how miraculous the transfers were, just all around, just incredible. The the whole that whole concept to me was just revolutionary. It really was. Again, it was like movies. It was like seeing movies that I had, seen on cable or, uh, through VHS, even on beta. Which I grew up at the end of that, or my first recollection was at the end of that. And so when DVD was announced, I remember like it was yesterday. I remember seeing kind of the big announcement that this new technology for movies, this whole DVD revolution, was kind of kicking off, and it just exploded. And that was really the time when I really dove into it and I started buying movies. I had, I remember when that was a thing, and I remember I had a membership then to Opera House Video, and I still do. And this was like, geez, I mean, you're going back years and years. It's crazy because I think it's almost like 20 years ago or so. It's ridiculous how that took off and it exploded. And I remember seeing, chomping at the bit to see movies in this new format. And then when DVDs became, were they were out on the market and you could buy DVDs. I remember having like a list of films that I needed to buy, and I remember buying the first DVDs I remember buying were uh, 2001: A Space Odyssey from Stanley Kubrick. I remember the other movie I bought on DVD was Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. The other one I remember buying was Alien, also by Ridley Scott. And I think there was a couple other movies. I think the other one that I remember buying on DVD was Tim Burton's Batman with Michael Keaton. There was a handful of movies that I automatically wanted to buy in this new format. And I remember just, you know, after I bought them, I just got obsessed with them, and I used to watch them all the time. And that's what started. That's where the I got bit by that bug. And then fast forward, another 10 years. Over that time, I accumulated a whole bunch of DVDs, and I started being a real collector of movies, and I started to really get into exploring directors that I loved, and it was just a great period. And when the whole Blu-ray thing came about, I was pretty late to the game. I was very reluctant at first. The main thing was I wasn't really excited about having to buy, well, a new TV, and having to buy a whole new system, and then having to buy, like, for example, movies that I already owned on DVD. And sometimes, well, for example, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. I've talked about this before, but I remember buying about 3 or 4 different editions of that movie on DVD, and I was always really happy with those editions. One of my all-time favorite movies. And so I was not excited about having to upgrade it even more and spend even more money for even additional copies. So I was really reluctant. And then I came around. I came around after, Blu-ray was around for about, it was probably around for about 8 years or so. And then I finally, just decided to do it. I had seen a couple of movies on Blu-ray, around that, before I decided to make up my mind to go in that direction. And I was kind of like, I don't know. Like, I thought it was great, but not worth spending, because at that time, Blu-rays and Blu-ray players were very expensive. But it was becoming really popular, and what have you. So, and I wasn't sold. And then there were, some time went by. I saw a couple of movies that I really loved on Blu-ray, and then I was like, wow, like this is it. This is, this is the ultimate way to see these movies. So then after that, I just I switched completely into just buying Blu-rays. I still buy DVDs here and there. There are, usually in my travels, if I go to, Goodwill, or, I sometimes go to, other shops that just happen to have, they might sell movies. And I usually always, sometimes I'm amazed by what I'll find. But generally, for big purchases, I've focused on Blu-rays. And so I did a show, and I've been collecting Blu-rays now for probably about, not all that long, maybe about 5 years. And so that's where I've switched over, where that's pretty much all I buy. I buy less DVDs than I did at one time. I still buy them if they're really, really cheap, and you can get them for like $2 now. It's kind of crazy. Blu-rays have come down dramatically. So, the market is just nuts. And, but I've switched completely over into, as far as putting, a chunk where I want to put the majority of my money, as far as, being a collector and a fan of films and a film fanatic. I go on Blu-ray all the way. So that's where it goes, and that's where my dollars go. And and it's the best. And I've never looked back. So I did a show a couple of weeks, or actually I should say a few days ago, where I covered probably my favorite Blu-ray that I have of my collection. I have a pretty good collection. I mean, was kind of late to the game, like I said, as far as Blu-rays. I don't buy VHS anymore. My VHS player recently died completely, and I know there's kind of this VHS kind of collector's thing that's been happening, where now VHS tapes that are unopened and still sealed, they're actually, worth quite a bit of money. And there's been kind of a little bit of a weird renaissance around VHS, where, people sell them now and trade them, but then people who collect them, they're actually worth quite a few dollars. And then there's what I've also seen on online various YouTube channels where some of these guys will spend quite a bit of time talking about their VHS collection. So it's kind of crazy. I understand it. I think it's more out of like a pure nostalgic thing. I still love VHS, but as far as the sheer quality of a movie and getting that kind of maximum impact from the experience, I mean, it's pretty piss poor in comparison. So I don't really seek it out. I stopped buying VHS altogether. Now that I don't have a player, I have a lot of VHS tapes. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them. I'm going to probably, well, I'll probably end up hanging on to them, but it would be nice to maybe sell them or maybe trade them or bring them to Goodwill or get rid of them, maybe get a little bit of money for them, because there's quite a few of those movies that I do own on VHS, and I have a pretty good collection. There's a handful of those movies. There's probably about 15 to 20 of those movies that I really really want to get on Blu-ray, but I've had a hard time finding them, particularly a few of them. So I'll hold on to them for a while, but I have no desire to buy or to get a VHS player. It's too much crap to accumulate, to have to set up, and so you know eventually I'll figure something out. But I did a show on my favorite Blu-ray that I have out of the 5 or 6 years that I've been buying them, and I've been buying quite a few. I've been buying lots of new ones, lots of movies that I have never seen before. I've done lots of shows talking about that whole thing. So, but my favorite Blu-ray that I own is the Apocalypse Now Redux, the collector's or the deluxe edition or the director's cut of the Francis Ford Coppola classic Apocalypse Now. One of my all-time favorite movies, definitely, in my top 5 list, if there, is such a thing. My favorite movie of all time is also by Francis Ford Coppola, The Godfather. I did a show just on that movie a while back. But I have to say, as far as the sheer experience, my favorite and my most prized collection, in my collection, my favorite movie is Apocalypse Now, The Redux. It's almost 3 hours long, and it just comes with, hours, like probably at least 6 to 7 hours of special features. It is just incredible. The remastering of it is just unlike anything I've ever seen before, anything I've seen since. That is definitely my most prized possession. I bought it. I probably bought it about 3 or 4 years ago. I got the chance to see that version in the theater with with the original film, and it was, just a completely mind-blowing experience. And so that's easily my favorite Blu-ray of all time. I did a show on that Blu-ray a few days ago, and I really appreciate people checking out. I got quite a few people, a few thousand people that checked that video out. So very very cool. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a whole lot of fun. It's a whole lot of for me. It's been all kinds of. I've been discovering so many cool things, especially in the exploitation world. So it's just been amazing. So this show is going to be about this movie right here. This is a movie called Without Warning. This is a brand new movie that I'd never seen. I just came across it. I just finished this the other night. It was the first time I ever watched it. This is a beautiful Blu-ray. This movie is such an incredible exploitation movie. It's from 1980. It was directed by Greydon Clark. The cinematography was done by Dean Cundy, who is somebody I've talked about a lot on this channel. Dean Cundy is my favorite cinematographer of all time. So many great, there's so many great people obviously involved in making films. There's there's tons of great cinematographers, but Dean Cundey is my favorite guy. I he's probably obviously most well known for his work with John Carpenter. He did the cinematography for all of John Carpenter's films. And one of the coolest discoveries when I've really, since I've been diving into, especially exploring movies I've never seen before, Dean Cundey had a real extensive career in all of these great horror exploitation movies, and this is one of them. He did this about 2 years. Halloween came out in '78, and that was the first movie I saw with Dean Cundey as a cinematographer, and it was also the first uh, John Carpenter movie I ever saw. And when I bought this the other day, I realized, wow, Dean Cundey did this, and he did this after Halloween. And this is like the epitome of like horror, exploitation. It's so low budget, it's so cheesy, and it's so bad in some ways, but uh, it's so fun. It's so damn fun. I love this movie. This was a new discovery. Again, this package is really amazing. It's all 2K, and there's also a 4K version of this. It comes packed with all these great special features. The cast in this movie is amazing. Jack Palance, Martin Landau. I mean, just amazing. And I feel like this is one of the best exploitation movies I just discovered. There's a really awesome documentary and interview with Dean Cundey on here where he talks about, his love of this film, but then also his love of, really doing so much work in the exploitation world. He really embraced that whole period of his life, and especially after coming off of a really huge movie like Halloween, like he still did these kinds of films. And Halloween, I kind of consider it to be in that kind of category of the world of horror exploitation slasher movies, in regards to more so in the regards to that film being really a super low budget movie. It was one of the iconic movies that gave birth to the whole like slasher genre. And I know that the term slasher, exploitation or slasher horror films, that's actually been around for quite a few years. There were many Italian movies and European movies that were slasher movies before Halloween technically came out. There were a slew of other movies that came out during that time. One case in point, The Toolbox Murders, which I think is one of the greatest slasher movies ever. Pieces, which is an amazing movie. So there are like there's technically quite a few slasher movies that came out before Halloween. Like Halloween didn't give birth to that, but it was one of the biggest players, and I think one of the biggest components that helped shape slasher films. And I think it was one of the main movies that showed the Hollywood system at that time that a low budget movie can have a deep financial impact, or can really influence the world, and can really change the game as far as big budget versus low budget. And I think without Halloween, without that film, slasher films really would be very different. Like I said, slasher films were around before Halloween, but I think Halloween really raised the bar to a degree, and it went on to influence millions of filmmakers after, and also franchises. One of the biggest being Friday 13th, and I see it really being, I mean, culturally, it was the first movie with such a low budget to make such an incredible amount of money at the box office. Like, it really was an independent film, and it was made for such little money. and it had that whole archetype of the slasher killer, the mass killer, that was so influential, and I feel like it raised the bar to a degree in 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 that genre. And I've said before, and I'll always say it, but for when it comes to horror movies, and in particular the slasher horror film exploitation world, slashers are my favorite movie of all time. That's my favorite genre. Those movies I always go to. I just enjoy the hell out of them, and I can never get enough of them. And I feel like the role that Halloween played in kind of the shaping of that genre was deeply impactful. It really, I think it raised the bar, and I think it, obviously went on to influence millions of other filmmakers and films that came out after that. And I see its influence mostly in, particularly in the slasher, like the American. I see. I mean, I think the impact of that film was global, but I feel like it really influenced a lot of American exploitation directors that made these movies. Movies such as Maniac and all the Friday the 13th movies, and all the other slasher movies that came out in the 80s. It really had a huge impact. So, and, as well as what Dean Cundey did. I mean, just laying the groundwork for some of the greatest cinematography ever. With obviously Dean Cundey's influence, just massive. And I've always loved his work so much just because I always felt like the way he lights lights a lot of the scenes that are shot, particularly in John Carpenter's for a lot of his films, or for all of his films. He has this real minimalist approach, and he uses a lot of natural light, but he's able to just create so much atmosphere with what he's given. Just amazing. Like all of the films that I've seen with his cinematography expertise, where he is, you know, he's clearly, I always get like clearly a visionary cinematographer. Just everything, and he's got a certain style. Again, I think a lot of his main approach to how he does a lot of the scenes and shots and all of these great horror movies is I feel like he's a minimalist, but he's able to just create so much atmosphere where it just oozes with darkness. Halloween obviously is a magnificent example of that. Another film that I think is one of the best examples of that is John Carpenter's Escape from New York. Like, just amazing. And I feel like his art as a cinematographer almost acts, what I think it does, but it acts like a character in the films onto itself. And I can always tell whenever I see a film, and I can tell that he's a cinematographer. He's got this very distinct style. Just amazing. So I was super excited when I picked this movie out without warning that this was done by Dean Cundey. I have, and I've discovered a few other movies. I have a handful of other exploitation movies that he's done. He started off like many directors of cinematography or people in the film industry, where he worked on all kinds of super low budget exploitation movies, and then had really big success with Halloween, and then also all the movies he did with John Carpenter. But he still always worked in the exploitation world. Just really cool. One other movie that I discovered that I believe I did a show on, called Creature from Black Lake, which is such an awesome movie. Again, another super low budget, uh, 80s monster movie, and it's another just awesome exploitation movie. He did the cinematography for that, which I never saw that movie before, and again, it's such an awesome movie, and the cinematography is amazing. So I was super excited that when I saw this film the other day, and I went to Blue Moose on Sunday with some buddies, and I saw that this was there, and I saw that he did the cinematography for it. So I was just like, instantly, I was like, I gotta buy this. And plus the cast. I mean, Jack Palance and Martin Landau is just like this. This looks so awesome. And the other really cool discovery that I just had fairly recently is I did a show on a movie that I just bought. I had been hearing about it for a long time, but I never saw it. And it was a movie called by the name of Satan's Cheerleaders, which is such a killer exploitation movie. It's from like 1974, I believe. Wicked old school. Awesome movie. Such an awesome, trashy exploitation movie. I did a show on that probably a few months ago, and that was directed by Greydon Clark, and he also directed this film. So that was another thing of another reason why I had to buy it because I really love that movie. I think it's just a hot piece of trash, and and it totally lives up to its title, Satan's Cheerleaders. Greydon Clark is killer. I'm gonna be, in my future adventures to Bull Moose, I'm gonna be looking out for a lot more of his movies. I own two of them now, and just great. His track record so far is just awesome. I love that this is so different. It's again, it's a pure exploitation movie. It's so low budget, but it's just so magical. I just love it. He did so. Yeah, Satan's Cheerleaders actually came out in 1977. He also did The Uninvited in 1988. Without Warning, this movie right here in 1980. Joysticks in 1983, which looks amazing. Another movie of his that looks just incredible is Angel's Revenge in 1979. These movies I have not seen. The Return in 1980 and Wacko in 1982. Just very cool. Like, really, really cool. And again, that's one of the things that I love about where kind of my whole mode of thinking has changed, where I've been just discovering so many cool directors and so many great exploitation movies. Black Shampoo was another movie he did in 1976, which looks like a killer like black exploitation movie. Skinheads in 1989. Dance Macabre with Robert Englund in 1992. Final Justice in 1985. So he did a ton of movies. Greydon Clark. So he directed this too, and this movie is without exception just a killer sci-fi movie. It's got some of the worst and yet some of the most amazing practical effects I've ever seen. And it's so silly and ridiculous. Like there are these scenes of where there's kind of this like the editing is really strange in this film, and there's these scenes of where things happen, but then there's like this kind of dead silence that happens and makes the scenes where it feels like everything is awkward. And if it was done by a different director, maybe with say a bigger budget or what have you, there would have been lots of probably lots of editing going on or lots of cuts to shorten some of these scenes. But being that it feels like they obviously Greydon Clark didn't have a very large budget, and it really shows on this movie. And being that they didn't have a lot of time to make this movie, I think they only shot it in a couple of weeks. They basically did a lot of these one take scenes where they're kind of long and there's not really a lot of cuts. But I just think if it was done by a director who was say I don't know, more technically skilled, or if they had a bigger budget, those scenes would have been trimmed, quite a bit, and would have been from an editing perspective, this film would be probably much different and more, to a degree, like formulaic, I guess. But being that it's so low budget and there's these big takes and there's like these scenes where there's some horror elements that happen or something, kind of scary happens, but then there's like this awkward, downtime, and it just, I don't know, it feels like it adds this kind of added charm to the scene and makes them a little bit more campy and more uh, hilarious, and more awkward. And I that's what I love about it. That's what I love about, you know well, that's one of the aspects and one of the traits of why I love exploitation movies, because that's very much a big part of it. But particularly around this movie is that it has those kind of awkward, lingering scenes, and it just adds to the fun. And you can actually see for when there's scenes where they use these practical effects, you can actually see the strings on screen. It's pretty hilarious. Like it's amazing. But yet, it's the effects are just great. Like it just feels real. It feels organic. It's got that tactile thing, and it's super fun. It's super campy and bad and terrible, but again, it's just fun. And I love, that's what makes up this movie and this genre of exploitation, because that's why those are the very reasons why I love it the most. I did a show, I did my first podcast, which was a blast, with Matthew Littlefield, who is a guy I know here in Maine who has a podcast, and I had a couple of experiences with him over the years. He's also a musician, and I played some gigs with him years ago, and he started doing his podcast, which I thought was cool. And you know, he does various different subjects, but he sometimes does these shows where he talks about movies. And I was a guest on his show, and it was a lot of fun. I was nervous at first. I've never been a guest on a show. For this channel, I have quite a few interview segments that I've done, and it's something I really love doing, where I have guests on the show, and that's something, that's probably my favorite part of this whole channel. And I'm looking forward to doing more and more of those when the opportunities present themselves. But doing the show on Matt's show was the first time I was ever a guest on a show, and it was really cool because we talked about some music stuff, but the main thing we talked about was movies, and those very same things. As when he was asking me, what do I appreciate about, like, what are the things that make me gravitate towards exploitation movies so much. And those very same things, the campiness, the humor, the cheesiness, the rawness, especially the rawness, the atmosphere, the sleaziness, all those things are great. And like I said, this movie is packed with all kinds of special features, and they have interviews with the writer and the producers and various guys that worked on this film, and they talk about that extensively, of where they were, they're guerrilla filmmakers. They had to just go for it. They had experience in a lot of these guys, which I've talked about before. A lot of these guys that were directors of a lot of these sleazy movies had experience in working in all kinds of departments, in all different facets of filmmaking, whether it was producing, financing, directing, being the cinematographer in certain projects, writing certain projects, writing some screenplays, also doing the practical effects, and also even starting their own distribution companies. And the reason that they did, a lot of these guys and girls wore all of these hats, was because they kind of had to. They were working outside of, quote unquote, a big system, being Hollywood. So they were filled with all this passion, so they just made things happen. And I feel like, and yet at the end of the day, even like a movie like Without Warning, for instance, which by certain standards of people who love films would say this is like maybe unwatchable. But to me, it's like watching this. Not only is it fun and entertaining, it's I think it's you could tell the people involved with the film just had a good time making it, and it was the true definition of a passion project. And I think that passion shines through so much, and outshines any of the negative things around the film, as far as it not being, you know, technically the best shot movie, or there might not be the best actors, or the like I was talking about the editing for this film. You totally, for me, I overlook all those things, and I end up like embracing those things as being, you know, loving that there's those mistakes in the film, and it just enhances the experience. But just an awesome movie, totally new discovery, as well as Greydon Clark. Like I said, I just discovered him recently. My first movie of his that I bought was Satan's Cheerleaders, just a killer movie. I did a show on that. And this is the other movie, and I'm really looking forward to tracking down more of his films. Uh, I have it on my. I did a show way back when on another slasher exploitation movie of mine that I really, really love, and it's this movie called Pieces, which is a Spanish exploitation or knockoff movie of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but just an incredible movie. Just one of my favorite. It's easily one of my favorite slasher movies. And that package is incredible. Like, it comes with all these special features, and there's a really amazing documentary that's like close to 2 hours, where it talks all about the history from like the 70s and 80s, the history of 42nd Street in New York, when it was kind of the mecca for all of these movies, with the grindhouse cinemas and that whole entire scene, and the sex district that was going on, and how New York was a very different place. It was kind of a dangerous place. It was a very sleazy place. But that documentary is just amazing because it goes into such detail on, you get a real sense of what it was like to be there, and, just how it was, you know, an incredible time for cinema. And there's all these great interviews. There's interviews with uh, all these great directors that were putting out all these trash movies at the time. Bill Luswig is in there, he directed Maniac, which is my all-time favorite slasher movie. And there's also some really cool interviews with Greydon Clark on there. And so, again, lately it's been the thing of just discovering all of these other directors and all of these other films that I've never saw, because I've been so interested in, seeking out all of these great exploitation movies that I saw, when I was a kid. And it's just led me to discover all of these other films. But awesome movie. I totally recommend this. The transfer of this is beautiful. The picture and the sound, it's loaded with special features. It's a great package. Super excited. I got this really cheap. The artwork is just awesome. And, it's got Jack Palance in it and Martin Landau, two, iconic American actors. Just really great. Just terrific. So, yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough. It is one of my favorite discoveries. Definitely one of my favorite discoveries of recent times. So, Without Warning, directed by Greydon Clark in 1980. So, thanks again, everyone, for checking out this channel, and we will see you next time. Peace.